that the soldiers coming and speaking out are not the problem. The soldiers coming and speaking out, in my eyes, are maybe a way for a solution.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. Today we talk about Palestine, Iraq, and Romania. We begin with several minutes of New Haven's Mayday Parade. Most demands centered around justice for immigrant workers and protests of police brutality. Bishop John Seldes Jr. spoke before the march.
No justice! No justice! Back in Ferguson we said, no racist! How y'all doing today? How y'all doing today? I can't hear you. Make some noise! I got some folk here who are with a group in solidarity from B-More. Give them a round of applause. They're gonna play something in a minute. Let me just say a few words. It is very clear that what we are doing here today is from a long line and tradition of activism throughout our history. Just what happened in Ferguson, what is happening in Baltimore, what happened in Cleveland, what happened in Chicago, what happened in Oakland is all a part of the same tradition. We are not free. Yes, sir. There is a system in place that is dominating our people. Oppression and repression is a real thing. So what's happening here today as brothers and sisters in Baltimore, just like brothers and sisters in Ferguson, they leaned into risk, and they are not thugs. They are freedom fighters as far as I'm concerned.
Where's the big camera? You're down to this.
People united! We'll never be defeated! People united! We'll never be defeated! People united! We'll never be defeated!
There's a group of dissident Israeli soldiers called Breaking the Silence. We have featured their work many times on our program. They've issued a new report on Israeli actions in Gaza last summer, exposing new levels of brutality. The report has received lots of attention. This was shown on Democracy Now! In early May.
In a video made by Breaking the Silence, a first sergeant in the Israeli military, his voice distorted, describes how a commander told him there are no innocent civilians, and to assume anyone within 200 or 400 meters of the Israeli Defense Forces was an enemy.
Commander announced, "Folks, tomorrow we enter. I want you to be determined, task-oriented, and confident. The entire nation is behind you." The usual speeches. And then he spoke about the rules of engagement. And I quote, the rules of engagement are. Any person at a distance that could put you at risk, you kill him with no need for clearance, meaning anyone at a distance of 200, 300, 400 meters from us isn't an ordinary civilian. According to IDF logic, he must be there for a reason, because an ordinary civilian would flee the area, and so we must kill him with no need for clearance. For me, it was just spine tingling. I said to him, let me get this straight. Any person I see in the neighborhood where we're headed, I spot him and kill him? He said yes. Any sane person who sees a tank battalion in his neighborhood will run away. If he sticks around, then he's up to something. And if he's up to something, it's against you. So shoot him. So I tried to dig a little deeper and asked, what if it's an innocent civilian? He said, there are no innocent civilians. Your presumption should be that anyone within the area of battle, 200, 300, 400 meters from you, is your enemy.
That was an Israeli Defense Force, IDF soldier, who served during last summer's Israeli assault on Gaza, known as Operation Protective Edge. His testimony is part of a new report just released by the veterans group Breaking the Silence. For more, we go to Tel Aviv, Israel, where we're joined by Avner Gvaryahu, Director of Public Outreach at Breaking the Silence. He's a former IDF soldier who served from 2004 to 2007 as a sergeant in a special operations unit around Nablus and Jenin. We welcome you, Avner, to Democracy Now! Talk about the number of people who are speaking out and why you have done this now.
So hi, Amy. We're a group, Breaking the Silence as an organization, a group of former IDF soldiers, and actually some of us are still current IDF soldiers. Throughout the years, we've met more than 1,000 soldiers. In this time around, this summer, when the summer ended and we saw the amount of damage, we realized that something went terribly wrong. And we actually started getting phone calls, emails from soldiers who were themselves in this operation. And then we ourselves also started reaching out to people. So we're talking about, as you said, more than 60 soldiers. A third of them are officers, which is a very high number for us. And we're talking about people that all served during the summer in different positions, in different units. We're not talking about soldiers from only one specific place, but throughout the entire strip, in different positions. I think reading these testimonies, it definitely did this to me and to us in the organization, but I think it's very, very clear that something went terribly, terribly wrong, and the bare minimum we can do is listen to the same soldiers we sent to fight in our name.
And Avner, what penalties are in all of these clips? The soldiers are anonymous; their identities are not revealed. What penalties do they face for speaking out? And how did you manage to get so many people to get together to testify in one video?
Well, it's actually it's not an easy task. It's not trivial to speak out in Israel today. It's definitely something that is difficult. And I have to say that the soldiers who are anonymous and all the testimonies that are given to us, one-on-one. So we know each and every one of the testifiers, but for various reasons we have decided to make sure all our testifiers will be anonymous, but they're not scared of the penalties. They're not scared of the legal repercussions. They're actually scared of the reaction of their society and the fact that they will be seen as the scapegoat. And I think one of the points that we've always tried to make is that the soldiers coming and speaking out are not the problem. The soldiers coming and speaking out, in my eyes, are maybe a way for a solution. They're really managing to pinpoint or to put a spotlight on the orders they got from a PI, and that's where we're going to try to push the debate, to a larger public debate about the way we fight our wars, the way we fight in Gaza, and maybe try to make sure that next time around won't be that close, or maybe won't happen at all.
In this clip, a first sergeant describes his commander's order to randomly fire on a neighborhood in the Gaza Strip during the assault last summer.
So he gave an order. Guys, park the tanks in a row, assume position facing the neighborhood of Al-Burj, and prepare for contact. Contact means we all shoot at once. After a countdown, 3, 2, 1, shoot. I remember all the tanks stood in a row, and I personally asked my commander, where do we shoot? He said, wherever you like. Later on, I also heard from the other guys that everyone just chose a target. And he said on the radio, good morning, Al-Burj. Guys, we're going to do a good morning, Al-Burj. This meant waking up the neighborhood to show that the IDF is here, and to deter them. I remember how the tanks stood in a row. So did ours, and I, the gunman, looked at some house, a very tall house, in the center of that neighborhood. Some 2,000 meters away, which is about 2 kilometers, and I asked my commander, where in the house do I aim? He said, aim a little to the right, a little to the left, at that window, at that floor. 3, 2, 1, shoot. And we all shot shells sporadically, of course. At no point was anyone shooting at us, though.
Again, that soldier, his face is blurred and his voice is disguised. Our guest is Avner Gvaryahu. He's a first sergeant in the IDF, the person we just heard. So you interviewed, or Breaking the Silence interviewed, somewhat 70 officers, soldiers. You have this all on videotape?
So a little bit less than 70 soldiers, many of them officers, were interviewed. Not all are on video. A small number of them was willing to be filmed on video because of the things I mentioned earlier. I mean, we're talking about a real fear, which I can definitely relate to, but still they found in them the urge and the need to come and speak out. This specific clip or testimony was really, as you mentioned, from a soldier who served there, was a gunner in the armored corps. I think the interesting thing about this testimony is that it's actually not that unique. We hear very similar stories, incidences from various soldiers in different places. And the stories that keep coming up are the fact that basically soldiers were told to, first of all, almost constantly shoot, which is something that is not the procedure, just in comparison during the second intifada around the year 2000 in the Gaza Strip. In order to shoot, in order for a tanker or for a gunner to shoot a tank shell, he actually needed permission from his battalion officer. We're talking in this time around, in this round, soldiers that were very, very young soldiers, sometimes enough as the tank commander gave these orders. So basically soldiers were told almost constantly shoot. And this is something, as we just heard, many times in areas that they were not shot at from, many times to areas they had no idea what they're actually shooting at.
Note that Gvaryahu says that Israeli army rules about when to open fire are even more permissive now than they were a dozen years ago. So it's even worse now than when the brutal Ariel Sharon ruled Israel. The group's report is called How We Fought in Gaza 2014. I want to read just one paragraph, testimony of an Israeli sergeant. Before I do, you'll note that in it he refers to a story troops were told by an officer about an old Palestinian man who supposedly was a suicide bomber. This is what the sergeant said. There was this one time when an old man approached the house and everyone remembered hearing about that booby-trapped old man. This happened right around noon, between noon and 2 p.m. So this old man came over, and the guy manning the post, I don't know what was going through his head. He saw this civilian and he fired at him, and he didn't get a good hit. The civilian was lying there writhing in pain. We all remembered the story going round, so none of the paramedics wanted to go to treat him. It was clear to everyone that one of two things would happen. Either we let him die slowly, or we put him out of his misery. Eventually, we put him out of his misery, and a D9 armored bulldozer came over and dropped a mound of rubble on him, and that was the end to it. You, through your tax money, helps pay for these atrocities to the tune of $3 billion a year. For the full report, go to breakingthesilence.org.il. Now I'm going to read a letter that I wrote to 60 Minutes after seeing a letter that their journalist Scott Pelley had put out explaining why he was going to be putting some very disturbing things on the show that evening. Here's what I wrote. I read Scott Pelley's statement explaining why he'll be showing disturbing video of the sarin gas attack in Syria tonight. He said that's not the kind of thing you want to report on for a couple days and then walk away and never remember again. You want to never forget that kind of thing happened. And that's where 60 Minutes comes in. I agree. We should never forget this atrocity by the Assad regime. However, I want to ask why 60 Minutes has forgotten an atrocity that it once reported on and then never mentioned again. On May 12, 1996, Leslie Stahl had an extraordinary piece on the effects of sanctions on Iraq, showing Iraqi hospitals without basic supplies, how the sanctions had killed, up to that time, over 500,000 children. She interviewed then U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Albright. The ambassador made no dispute of the 500,000 dead figure, but justified the deaths as worth it. She said the deaths were worth it so that the U.S. would not have to fight Iraq again in another Gulf War. She essentially admitted to crimes against humanity. Yet to my knowledge, 60 Minutes has never brought up the subject again. The sanctions continued more or less for another 7 years. High UN officers quit their posts in protests, but 60 Minutes did not go back to the subject. Dennis Halliday, who had been UN Assistant Secretary General, who was one of those who resigned his UN post, estimated that sanctions had killed 1 million Iraqis. I urge you on the 19th anniversary of your excellent report to look at sanctions again. Talk about the effects of sanctions, the people who ordered them, and their subsequent careers. No one was fired, jailed, or even demoted for ordering the sanctions. Along that line, I would also ask you to look at the case of New York cancer doctor, Dr. Rafael Dafir. He is in jail on a 22-year sentence for breaking the sanctions and sending money and goods to Iraq. He was arrested in 2003 with the media saying he was a terrorist. However, the major crime for which he was convicted was money laundering. He was sending money to Iraq to help those affected by the sanctions. Surely his breaking of the U.S. regulations was a less severe offense than killing 1 million people in peacetime. This case would make an interesting story. I didn't get any answer from 60 Minutes. Mecca has called for May 12th to be remembered as Iraq Genocide Memorial Day. For more about that, go to our website, thestruggle.org. Speaking of 60 Minutes, last Sunday, Scott Pelley narrated a piece about Gaza. There were a number of good aspects to it and a number of weaknesses. Go to our website and click on Discussions for an article and comments about it. I'll be speaking to Susan Booth from the Archway Foundation, which helps kids in Romania. Good morning.
Good morning.
So tell us about Archway. What does it mean, Archway, and what does it do?
Archway is a foundation. It's a 501c3, and it was something that I established 16 years ago to help homeless children in Bucharest, Romania, because there was no one there that was interested in helping these children, and I figured I better get legal if I were going to get started. So
now, did this have something to do with Ceausescu and the fall of how are kids, orphans, runaways, how are they treated in the old regime?
In the old regime, they were hidden. What happened was, under Ceausescu, everybody was forced to have 6 children or more. Birth control was outlawed because Ceausescu wanted to build up the population to work in the industry that he envisioned coming to Romania. Well, when they took him out and shot him, the government subsidies stopped. And so now parents were choosing which children they could keep because they could afford to feed them and which ones they had to put out onto the street. I mean, we have a heartbreaking story over there, and the boy is still with us. 5 years old, on the bus with his mother, going into Bucharest to get ice cream. She leaves him on the street corner, gets back on the bus, and goes back to the countryside. It is absolutely heartbreaking, but unfortunately, this is what many of these children have faced. Those who were put out by their parents are one subpopulation. The other children are children who ran away from institutions before they closed the institutions because they had no more room. And the last group is the children that ran away from alcoholic families, alcoholic homes where they were abused tremendously.
Any idea how many people we're talking about?
When we started, there were about 800. I kept tripping over them in the streets of Romania. Now, because they're older and because they're having children of their own, we estimate the number to be around 2,000.
And what does the government say about all this?
The government is waiting for them to die. There are literally no programs for these children, and there are no programs because they have no identity papers, which means that nobody knows about them, nobody cares about them, and nobody does anything about them.
When are you normally supposed to get these identity papers?
They're like our Social Security numbers. You know, when a child is born, you go to the town hall, you register them, and then they're on the list. Now we have generations of people that have never been or never gotten identity papers because their parents either didn't register them or were afraid to register them or were not registered themselves.
So if you don't have an identity paper, what does that mean? What can't you do?
That means that you're stateless, which means that you have absolutely no rights and certainly no privileges. And in a country as poor as Romania, that's saying a lot. They cannot, they cannot go to school, which is tremendously tragic. They can't go to school because they don't have an address, and they don't have an address because they don't have identity papers. They cannot get a job. They cannot rent an apartment. They cannot work. They cannot go to church. They can't worship inside.
Why can't they walk into a church?
Because the people that run the church don't trust them enough not to steal the icons in the church. They're basically Russian Orthodox, and it's quite an elaborate quite an elaborate religion. So basically these kids are lepers, if I can use the word. Basically they're either invisible or there's something to be eradicated. And unfortunately, this is what they live with every day.
You're not Romanian, or do you have any Romanian background?
None whatsoever.
How did you get involved with this?
I was sitting at home on a Friday night after having had a tremendous fight with my boyfriend.
And where was home?
Home was West Haven, Connecticut. And I watched Barbara Walters cry at the images of children that had been stuck in institutions under the Ceausescu regime. And I realized right then and there the injustice of us in this country and other parts of the world having so much when other little human beings have nothing at all. And it was a life-changing moment. I just knew that I had to do something about these kids. That was about 18 years ago, and I've been actively working towards it ever since for the past 16 years.
So what are some things that Archway does for these kids in Romania?
Some of the things that we do, we have had an ongoing food and clothing distribution program. If they show up at our door, we take them to the hospital if need be. If for a while there, we actually opened a long-term shelter where we had 28 children who lived with us and were able to attend school because they used the Archway address as their address while we got them identity papers.
Why did that stop?
The funding pretty much ran out, and it's difficult to raise money for children that no one knows about. So we closed that, but the good news is we now have a building in the poorest sector of Bucharest, and so we have access to a lot more street children that didn't know about us or that we did not know about. So every day they're coming to find out what they can get, and we find out what they need, and we adjust what we provide for them depending on what their needs are.
This week, the world's atmosphere reached a new grim milestone. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air reached 400 parts per million worldwide, averaged over the month of March. This is far above the 350 ppm that climate scientists deem the maximum for prosperous human life. And unless there's a radical change, carbon dioxide levels will go much higher. 350connecticut.org and a number of organizations will be holding a climate march at the Connecticut State Capitol in Hartford on May 31st at noon. Reverend Lennox Yearwood of the Hip Hop Caucus and Deacon Art Miller from the Office of Black Catholic Ministries will be among the speakers. More on this on our program next week. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.